Let me share a story with you today. It comes from the book of Acts. You can read it along with me. It's in the 5th chapter. When they had brought them, they had them stand before the council. The high priest questioned them, saying, "We gave you strict orders not to teach in this name, yet here you are, and you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching, and you are determined to bring this man's blood on us." But Peter and the apostles answered, "We must obey God rather than any human authority." Let me tell you another story. This is a story that I've told before to different people. This is a story I'll probably tell again. It comes from my childhood when I was growing up in a place called Fort Worth, Texas. I was a young teenager, and it just so happened that our family almost always went to church, almost always went to worship on Sundays. Right down the street from where Nancy's family was going, but we didn't know that at that point. But I don't know whether it was as a bribe or a reward, but we would often go to a restaurant after that as a family. And that was at the time when going to restaurants really was a pretty special deal. It wasn't an everyday occurrence. And this restaurant we went to was named Cross Keys. And it was a rather formal place. It wasn't fast food. But there was something fascinating that would always happen there. We'd walk in, and they'd been there, we'd been going for a number of years, and Billy was our waiter. Billy was a wonderful young man, and he would welcome us. We would be seated, and almost every single time we went, he would take care of us. And he knew us, and we developed a routine, you might say. So we would be seated, he would come over and he would greet us, he would welcome us with his very polished manner. "Mr. Garrett," not me, my dad. "It's so good to see you. Thank you for being with us today." He was very dignified. "Mrs. Garrett, you look lovely today." That was my mom. Not Miss Pat, my sister. "Thank you. Thank you." Is it, And Bob. Bob. I don't know how that happened. We had the same name, but he was convinced my name was Bob. So every Sunday, Mr. Garrett, Mrs. Garrett, Miss Pat, and Bob. The same routine would happen to some degree when he would take our order. He'd change it up just a little bit. He'd go to my mom first. "Mrs. Garrett, what would you have today? What may I bring you?" She would order. "Mr. Garrett, what can I bring you?" She would order. "Miss Pat, what would you like today?" She would order. "And Bob, how about you?" It became a routine. One Sunday on the way there, I had an idea. I didn't want to embarrass Billy. He was such a nice guy. And I don't know how this got started, but I had an idea. "Mom, we know what's going to happen. So let's do something. Let's fix this." Right after Pat, my sister, orders, "Jump in there," and turn to me and call me by Bill. "Billy will figure it out." Very easy. Okay. We arrived. We were seated, same process. Billy came back to take the order. "Mrs. Garrett, what may I bring you today?" My mom ordered. "Mr. Garrett, what about you?" He ordered. "Miss Pat?" She ordered, and immediately, perfectly on cue, my mom turned around to me and said, "And what are you going to have today, Bob?" If you're keeping score, Mom 1, kids 0. I had to hand it to her. But after a while, as I thought more about that, the more it bothered me. because I didn't want to be Bob. I wanted to be Bill. I was at that age where all of a sudden you start defining yourself. You want to be who you are. We grew up in an era that was convincing people to be who they weren't. Whether it's through advertisement, whether it's through peer pressure, whether whatever. But no, this is what you need to be. This is who you need to be. This is how you need to act. And I was standing up for my right to be Bill, to be me. That has become an important story in my life, as it turns out. Not because, hats off to my mom, but because that was that moment, you might say, that I claimed, no, I want to be me, at least in my mind. There's another story, the one we just read today. Remember what happened in this story? If you go back a little bit more in Acts, you'll find out what was happening up to this moment was that this is after Pentecost, actually. And the Spirit has come amongst the people and lit them on fire. A lot of people will say that the book of Acts is in reality about the Spirit unhindered, the Spirit uncontained, the Spirit that cannot be held in check. And that had come into the people. Well, one of the things that they did, they started coming out of hiding. They were in hiding because of what had happened. They were fearful, and they knew that they were right a target. But they started coming out, and they started teaching. They started talking about how this person named Jesus had changed their lives. How this person named Jesus, in fact, had helped them find out who they were. No longer a tax collector, no longer a fisherman, but the ones who would show love to the world, the ones who would reach out to those who sometimes nobody else would reach out to. And this was the story they were proclaiming. But of course that wasn't a good story in terms of a lot of other people thought. That was a dangerous time. The church in control at that time understood that you don't want to ruffle the feathers with the Roman Empire. And that's exactly what these early to someday be named Christians would do. They were more than ruffling feathers. And so the high priest would get together from time to time and say, what are we going to do about these? So they brought in John and Peter, for example, and said, okay, enough is enough. Let's just make sure you understand what's going on. You will not teach anymore. You will be quiet. You will not go to the temple. You will not go into the streets. You will be quiet, or there will be consequences. They left. And you know what they did? They kept preaching. They kept teaching. It didn't go well. They were brought back in. They were put in prison. If you follow the story, you find out that the miracle happened somehow. We don't know what it was. We don't care. Somehow they were released. They were free, except you might say at that point, maybe they would think, this is serious. This prison thing is serious. We got lucky. We somehow escaped. This is okay. Maybe it's okay if we're called Bob. Maybe it's okay if we're tax collectors. Maybe it's okay if we go back to be fishermen. Maybe that's going to be the best thing we can do, the smartest thing we can do. But instead they go teaching again. The high priest here, these characters that have escaped prison, somehow we don't know how. They're teaching again. They're on the streets again. So they're drugged back in again. And this is where the story starts. That the high priests once again say, no. No. Hear me carefully. No. Go back and be Bob. Go back and be tax collectors. Go back. Go back. Just no. And what is it they say? We must obey God than any human authority. They have a story, you see, that they cannot not tell. They have this story that has been embedded in them, in their soul, in their spirit, in their mind, their heart, everything. And they cannot not tell the story because it is who they are now. Who are we? What is our story? Maybe individually, wouldn't it be fascinating? We're going to do this someday. I keep threatening that someday we're just going to turn the chairs around and we're going to talk about this or that. Someday we're going to do this. And I'm going to ask you to tell somebody how you became you and what it means. Not today. Let's talk about who we are as the church. What is our story? We had a pretty good story just today. And the story's not even over, is it? Did you see the little munchkins up here? Megan Peck made this song. Not because anybody told her, hey, you need to come up with a song. Not because they said, oh, and when you come up with a song, include this. She's been hanging around us for long enough, not very long, but long enough that she's starting to get the flavor of who we are. Did you read the words? Did you hear the words? Those are incredibly gifted words. The kids didn't sing along, but they've been hearing that. And when they're by themselves, you should have heard them practicing. They actually were singing the song somewhat. And these are little midgets, little munchkins. But they're getting it. They're starting to understand that this is a story that we have to tell. A story that we will tell. Did you hear our announcements today? As always, we go on and on and on. And what a glorious moment that is. Because it once again identifies who we are. And we have this passion, not just for ourselves, not just for our community, but for the world. And we don't mind sharing it. We don't mind inviting people to join with us. We went into our prayer time. And once again, isn't that who we are? That we embrace each other in times of sorrow and in times of celebration and thankfulness. In times when we're walking alone and we find out that we're not alone at all. The sharing that we do lifts this room up. And what I thoroughly love to see is that after you saw somebody stand up and introduce themselves, and maybe you don't know them, maybe you've never met them, but now you have a name to go with it. And now maybe you can understand, and you didn't get the whole story, but you go to that person and say, tell me about. Have you ever seen that happen? And we see some real connections, because that's who we are. And that's our story, the story that we keep telling each other and the world. Weather permitting, one way or the other, we're going to go dedicate and bless our solar panel right up there and our flags. Both a statement saying we believe in caring for the earth. We believe in caring for people. And we're going to shout it from the rooftops. That's our story. We cannot not tell it. What other things do we do? Oh, wouldn't it be fun to also have this conversation about everything of the way that we reach out? Not just as a congregation, because to tell you the truth, the most effective ministries we have is not by the church. It's by our individuals who get excited about what happens in the name of love. When people take on something, whether it's going to go see James Saucer, whether it's going to help out one another, maybe it's volunteering your time, maybe it's at a workplace, maybe it's school, maybe it's wherever, that you find a way to say, let me be with you. Ministry happens in all different ways, because that is our story. That is who we are. That is who we've become. So what are we going to do with this story that we have? Well, I think we find that we are part of this story. We are part of this grand story of life and love and spirit and compassion and caring. But that story is part of us, too. That story of life and love and compassion and caring. that story becomes who we are. And at some point, do we not realize that that is a story that we cannot not tell? That is a story that we must tell? It's attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, even though he didn't say it. But you know the phrase. Preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words. He didn't really say that. But we're going to say he did. Because it's so true. We tell the story not just by our words, but how we live, how we love, how we act. And this is the story that becomes who we are. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not if we will tell a story, but how will we tell the story? And that's my simple question. How will we tell the story? Because it must be told.